All right. Welcome to the second part of this MBA webinar series. I wanted to, again, introduce myself. I'm the founder and CEO of Right Track Admissions, a global admissions consulting company. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the second part of this webinar, which is going to be very, very important on the MBA admissions process. And we're going to be covering something extremely, extremely important, which is really writing those MBA essays, talking about the interview process, talking about the different components. We talked about some of the components on the last webinar, but we're going to go through some additional components of the application process. We're going to talk about the submissions process, success in the MBA program, and beyond. So please feel free to post questions and comments below. I will be checking those out regularly as we go through this process. So let's make sure we do that. And without further ado, let's get started. We've got a ton to cover and we got 1 hour or less to do it. All right, here we go. So like last time, I want to quickly introduce myself. Again, Hamad Zahawi, the founder and CEO of Right Track Admissions. I did my undergraduate at Berkeley, did my law degree, my undergraduate at UCLA, my law degree at Berkeley. Now, I did not go to law school, but I've helped tons and tons of people throughout the process since 2008 personally, just to be able to get them across the goal line and really maximize their chances of admission. Now, using the skills and best practices from Right Track Admission, I went to the University of Cambridge and also Harvard University, where this was taken to do my master's in public administration. Though while I was at Harvard, I did do kind of like a mini MBA in the fact that I took classes at the business school and took certain classes at the Kennedy School that very much formed the backbone of what an MBA would require in terms of like entrepreneurship, finance, operations, management, and other subject matters, including some soft skill courses. So I have a very good idea of even what it feels like to be kind of immersed in those kind of programs. But as I said, most importantly, I've really worked with so many applicants over the last 16 years to get them into MBA programs. And my staff has quite a few members of my staff do have MBAs from top institutions. So we do have the know-how and the skill sets to really get you into those top programs. So it's a bit about my background and starting Right Track. Let's continue with those application components. We spoke about some of them, including the resume in the last webinar, but let's kind of get into another very, very important component, which is the letters of recommendation. Now, the letters of recommendation is probably one of the most important parts of the MBA application, given that these recommenders are the ones who are going to be speaking about your professional expertise outside the scope of what you would be saying. So in that case, it's a subjective assessment from a third party that really serves to corroborate what you have gone through and what you are talking about, right? So I think that's very, very important to kind of keep in mind. Those letters of recommendation in terms of when, some schools ask up to 3, on average 2, but those letters of recommendation should be requested 2 to 3 months before they're due. So if you're applying in round 1, you should be begging the people to do it right now as we speak. Okay, you don't want to leave it to the kind of to the bitter end, because they'll lose the quality of those, and it would be seen by the recommender as a kind of a snub that you are asking them for them to put everything aside just to get that letter out for you. So you don't want to be in that circumstance. You want to make sure that you're submitting those letters and asking them and giving them plenty of time to actually write them. So who should you be asking them from? Professional, obviously the most important things, from a former and a current supervisor. I say former because they want to know kind of monitoring your evolution over time. How have you evolved? How have you grown through the process, right? And so you want to make sure that that kind of comes up in terms of the process. So they want to compare one letter of who you were before with a letter of who you are now. Now, in some cases, and I think this question does come up quite often, is, well, what happens if I can't get a letter of recommendation from a current supervisor? Because I want to tell them I'm leaving. So you need to address that in your addendum. We'll speak about the addendum shortly. And you're going to have to look for someone that can kind of speak to your current skill sets. So if it's not going to be your supervisor, maybe one level below your supervisor, but not someone who is your quote unquote co-equal colleague, because then they could be biased in providing you with their recommendation, which you don't want to undermine the veracity, the credibility of that letter. So the number one person that you want to get it from is your academic. Now, if you only have 2 or 3 years of, from your professional experience. Now, if you only have 2 to 3 years of professional experience, then it may behoove you to also get a letter, an academic letter of recommendation. So maybe 2 letters of recommendation that are professional, 1 that's academic. If you're way out, like 10 years out, and you can't get one that's academic in any stretch, then it could be 2 letters are professional and 1 letter that would, let's say, be volunteer to kind of offset, the overabundance of the professional recommendations. So again, professional is your number 1 priority. So at least 1 of your letters should be professional, ideally 2. And then if you're out of school for a while, then volunteer letter would be your 3rd. And if you've only graduated maybe 3 years prior, then you can get an academic one. You also have the option of getting an extracurricular letter and a current student or alum. So just kind of think about that in terms of the process as well. Now, who not to ask? Do not ask family members or friends, because again, that hurts the credibility of your letter. Don't ask someone that you're not 100% sure will have your back. I remember a great instance. I had a client, and I hadn't seen their letters. They didn't ask me to review the letters. So they submitted the letters and they applied first round and they got denied by Columbia. Then they decided in the second round to apply to Northwestern Kellogg, and they got in. And the only thing they tweaked between round 1 and round 2 was the letter of recommendation. And that, we would imagine, as a common denominator, is what got them into Kellogg. So I think those letters of recognition are really, really important, because initially that client wasn't 100% sure if they would have their back, but they just took the gamble and it didn't pay off. So ideally, when the person did look at the letter and said, you know what, I need someone who really has my back, it paid off and they got into Kellogg. Finally, don't ask a VP over cheerleader. Don't go for let's say the CEO of a company that doesn't really know you at all versus your supervisor, simply because they're the CEO of the company, even if they're a big deal, right? Because they'll end up using probably ChatGPT to write some kind of, basic letter that's just not going to show how much and how well they know you, right? So you do want to focus on getting someone who knows you very well, a cheerleader, versus someone who's just a VIP, that's just a name, because I think the schools are going to care more about the quality of the letter rather than who's writing it in the end of the day, unless, again, it's a family member or a friend or something that really kind of throws off the credibility of the letter. Now, you want to make sure you can ask these folks in person, ideally, and then make sure they're accessible. You don't want to ask someone who, again, is like a supervisor, but is constantly traveling. Because I had another client, I remember this, who was applying to Wharton first round. And he and I worked together nonstop, got all the application in, met the deadline, no problem. And then 2 days afterwards, he got an email from the recommender saying, hey, so when should I be submitting this letter? And he lost out on round 1. And so they pushed him to round 2. Thankfully, he was still admitted. But the idea is that, it could have completely deep-sixed his whole application if he didn't find out, because the letter would have never been submitted in time. So you want to make sure the person's accessible. You want to provide them with materials like your resume, a brag sheet. Sometimes we advise clients to do, which is essentially a document that has all the bullet points that you want them to really address in the letters of recommendation, which could be very, very important, right? In terms of the letter, you want to outline for them. And obviously, most instances, you send them an email. You go to the school, you put the email of the person who's recommending in the field, and it sends them an email that says, hey, Bob has basically requested a letter of recommendation from you. Please submit it by completing this form and submitting it. So they'll get all the background, but probably when you meet them, it's good to tell them, hey, listen, I'm applying to 1, 2, 3 schools. Hope you don't mind if I send you emails from each one of these 3 schools. And basically the way the letters are structured is that it's going to be a series of questions about 200 words each, or whatever, so that the recommender has an idea and can tell you, I can do this, or yes, I can do this, or I can do this, but provide me with some bullet points in a brag sheet, and so forth. I don't usually tell you to write the letters and have them submit it. Has it been done? Yes, many times. But it's not something that I want to in any way endorse, because it's not something that we want to encourage. Ideally, you find recommenders who really have your back, who can write the letters in full for you. Once you've submitted it, the letter, make sure to follow up and thank them for their time and thank them for actually having submitted that letter, because obviously they went out of their way to do it, and you want to thank them and let them know, if possible, the results of what happened. Looks like we got a question from Anna. Let's see. Sometimes recommenders, what you write in the letter and they sign it at the end. Do you recommend this, or better for another person? Yeah, great. So I answered your question, Anna, right there. Yeah. Don't write the letter if you can help it. Make sure, again, that the recommender is willing to have your back. At best, if they do ask you to write it, just say, listen, I'm happy to provide you with bullet points. And if you flesh out the bullet points well enough, they'll likely probably pop it into ChatGPT, say, write a letter based on these bullet points. They'll write it out. It shouldn't take them long. But as anyone who's used ChatGPT before, if you don't provide ChatGPT with enough instruction, you're going to get something incredibly generic. So you want to provide it with enough instruction through the bullet points of what you really want them to speak about. All right. So that's on the letter of recommendation. Again, thank you, Anna, for the question. Any other questions on letters of recommendation, please post them, and I'm happy to answer, not just letters of recommendation, or anything that we're going to cover today. All right. So let's get to the real meat and potatoes of what we want to talk about today. And probably one of the most important topics is a lot of MBA applicants. Some of them are great writers, and some of them, it's not their forte. So I want to kind of give you a little bit of the secret sauce that was what allowed us to excel as a company, which is really about writing the story that really makes it as compelling as possible for the different MBA programs. Now, hopefully you guys can read that. What I have here is the different types of prompts that you can expect from MBA schools and business schools, right? Take a quick look at it. You've got, a classic question on career. What are your career aspirations? Why do you believe in an MBA from our school will help you achieve them? I can't tell you how critical that question is. It is so important to know it inside out and upside down, because if you can't answer that question effectively, I don't even know why you're pursuing an MBA. Go back to the original webinar, the first one, and you'll see kind of a series of questions I ask you to start thinking about why you're doing the MBA. If you can't answer that question, then you're really going to be screwed. And I had another client who had all the credentials in the world and went in for the interview, and in the interview was just flailing because they were talking about, and even though I had coached them on this, they were talking about, we want to get an MBA so that we could do this, but we also think it would be cool to get an MBA so I can do that. And I want to get an MBA so I can do this. And it just sounded like the person's all over the place. And they ultimately, the interviewer didn't recommend them, and they didn't get it. So you want to make sure that your story is airtight and bulletproof and really follows an element of continuity that covers the whole application, that everything's kind of written in there, okay? That question is critical. Why you, why now, why us? Remember that. Why you, why now, why us? And I'll talk a little bit about that shortly. There's the diversity questions about their background, how you can add to the classroom discussion. The why our school essay, which is super important. Again, why you, why now, why us? You want to make sure that you have that question really buttoned up. And what really excites you about that MBA program for that school. Please use the space to share any additional information. We're going to talk about the addendum, but that's a very, very important part of the application itself as well. So you don't want to underestimate that. Describe a time when you led a team. What challenges did you face and how did you overcome them? Those are your classic leadership questions. You've got a failure question, the strengths and weakness question, which always throws people off because then they try to blame someone else. They don't kind of own up to that failure themselves. So you really want to think about that question very, very carefully. And then there's the classic reapplication questions. What have you done since you last applied to kind of strengthen your application? And, from that perspective, anybody has any questions on any of those prompts, please, send us a message and I will respond and address it on this webinar because there's a way to do each one of those questions. And obviously there's a lot of other ones. I remember one of my favorite questions ever came up in a Wharton application many years ago. And that question was, if you had to design a class at Wharton, what would it be? And I was like, wow, that would be such a cool question to ask. And I came up with the client, the both of us came up with, because the person really liked sports. So we talked about what is the economic feasibility study and how do you create a feasibility study and assess how you can create an Olympics or a World Cup bid, successful bid in a host country. So what does that look like? And so you basically, throughout the course, work on how to think about the economics, the business sense, the marketing, the branding, everything to kind of put together a proper bid for a fictitious Olympics or World Cup soccer. So I thought that was a really cool thing. I can't remember if the client got in, but I never forget that question. All right. So let's kind of jump into how we think about these essays. Why you, why now, why us? Why you? So really kind of talk about you, what makes you a special candidate. Why now at this juncture in your career? And why us in terms of why you think what you want to do, we're the best schools suited to get you to where you want to go. Okay. And when you write these essays, now I know some of these essays are not going to be a general personal statement, which may follow this trajectory exactly. But I want you to kind of think about some key things in terms of this classic story arc. Let's think about this. You've got the action sequence. You always kind of want to start it off as best as you can to hook in the reader, right? How do you pull them in? How do you get them excited by what you're going to talk about, right? So that kind of attention grabber, action grabber, pull them in, right? The second part of that is thinking about the background, right? Is developing the story. So now that you've pulled them in and engaged them, then you start talking a little bit about your background, your values, what makes you who you are, right? Then you go into C, career, in terms of talking about what you've done. D, direction. Now that we know what you've done based on who you are, which way do you want to go? I want to become a CEO of a company. I want to start my own business. I want to go into marketing. I want to go into finance, whatever it is. Okay. Then essentially you go into E, educational institution. That's the why us. Now that I've told you why now and what I want to do, now let me tell you why us. And then finally, you've got the resolution that brings the whole essay back full circle. Okay. Now, again, sometimes this formula won't fit an essay that tells you describe a failure, right? But you can still use key elements of it, like starting with an action sequence, developing the background of the failure, talking about the direction you took and what you did from what you learned, not what you learned, but what actions you took. Then E, you could talk about what educational experience you gained out of it. And then F, bring it back full circle and say, now that I've learned this, that problem was resolved or wasn't resolved, but I learned so much from it, right? So just, you could use that formula to answer almost any of the questions that we had just talked about. In terms of a lot of these, you can kind of use it from that perspective. So again, an action sequence, something that pulls them in, and it doesn't even have to be an action, just something that's like an attention grabber, right? Something like, a profound quote that really is close to you. Don't give me Martin Luther King or Gandhi or something, but something that's profound to you, like a mentor or your grandmother said it, or something that hooks them in. Or a dialogue is always great. A dialogue sequence with someone else, right? I think those are always interesting and catchy. Giving them a background, a profound statistic, something that really kind of throws them up like, wow, okay, let's see where this is going to go. And then you describe the background of whatever it was, kind of like if we go here and say, the diversity, right? So you explain something about the diversity, you explain a bit of a background about, your background and so forth. Then what transpired in terms of how that your background really transpired to something unique in terms of diversity. So say, I grew up in, whatever neighborhood, whatever it was, right? And then I worked on this project that really kind of got me thinking about 1, 2, and 3. Based on that, you go into the educational. I learned so much about that, and I want to basically bring those experiences to your classroom. And we're going to talk a little bit about the diversity statement shortly, or the diversity essay. But that's just kind of that curve is super important to kind of think about how to tell that story. Don't go in there. I've had too many clients walk in, and when they get a story like, describe a time you faced a significant, so how did you handle it and what did you learn? There will literally be people coming in saying, I worked at a bank. I wasn't able to achieve my metrics. I felt really horrific by not being able to achieve my metrics. I went to my boss and he said, you should learn to do 1, 2, 3 better. So I did, and I was able to, learn in the next time. It's so plain. It's so vanilla. It's so basic. When they have so many applications to read, they'll just completely glean over that kind of essay. It's just not going to hit home. So you really want to make sure that it kind of flows into a story and really kind of ends with something profound in terms of how you've developed from it. Okay. Now I've kind of drilled in a little bit closer on two different types of essays. Well, actually 3 that we're going to cover. We're going to cover the diversity statement, the why school statement, and the addendum, which again is the diversity statement there, the second one, the addendum down here, and the why school essay. So we're going to really kind of focus on these 3 right now. So What is diversity? Sexual orientation, socioeconomic hardship, medical tribulation, professional endeavor, neurodiversity, ADHD, autism, whatever someone may suffer from, but that they have overcome it, with grace and grown stronger from it. The idea here is that diversity is not just the color of your skin or your nationality or your religion. There's a lot more that comes from diversity, in terms of what you represent and what you learn from it. Now, as you can see there, I still kind of use the ABC formula, attention grabber, as I said, that you kind of lead off with that in terms of how to write, in terms of the diversity statement, something that really grabs them. As I said, a statistic, a quote, a dialogue, an action, what have you. B, background to the diversity itself, to your background in terms of who you are. Then C, the circumstance itself, which in this case would be the actual diversity, the point that something happened. Maybe it is about neurodiversity. You talk about how you have it, but then it reached a kind of crescendo whereby you said, that you were, discriminated or misunderstood or whatever, right? So you talk about the circumstance, then you debrief the school and saying, based on that circumstance, here's kind of what I learned from it and what I learned about myself. Then E, engagement. Now that I've learned this experience, I want to share that with your MBA program in terms of bringing 1, 2, 3, 4 to the classroom and to extracurricular activities. And then finally, F, future, that you plan to continuously do this type of work going forward. So you can still use the A, B, C, D, E, F, except you're going to tweak it slightly so that it's still an engaging essay from start to finish. A, B, C, D, E, F, attention grabber, background, circumstance, debrief on the issue, engagement in terms of what you're going to do now at the school and going forward in the future. All right. Now, answering the why school essay, or why our school essay. Here, I kind of use something called CLAP: community, location, academics, and personal. With community, you want to talk about the vibe of the campus, right? The student organizations, the campus community, the student treks. As you know, a lot of schools have student treks where they travel to different countries and engage with industry leaders in different parts of the world. That's kind of like the community vibe there. And as you know, in an MBA program, it's all about the community. Very few people are going there just to learn the raw, hard skills. It's really about the soft skills you gain and the people you meet and the network you have. I can't tell you how many people get jobs. We talked about this in webinar 1 from an MBA program itself. So it's super, super important for you from that perspective. L, location. So if you are like going to NYU or Columbia, right? It's so important because it provides you with an incredible amount of job opportunities in the New York area, right? Same with going to, Anderson or Marshall in Los Angeles, or GSB at Stanford, or Haas at Berkeley in the Bay Area. These are areas, these are hot, ripe markets for professional opportunities and development, right? So in the end of the day, when you talk about the location, you're going to talk about job opportunities, access to industry leaders, entertainment, social life, whatever it is that really kind of flexes the location of why that school matters to you, not just the campus, but the location itself. Academics, obviously, the classes, the professors who may be industry leaders, the curriculum, key, like the key way that they design the curriculum from the first to the second year and so forth, the style of teaching, right? Harvard's case study methodology and so forth versus other schools that teach, maybe by, the black letter versus other schools that may be more experiential. Like I remember, not Babson. Babson's more on the entrepreneurship side, but I think Northeastern does a lot of stuff on the experiential learning. So they really double down on that, right? Certain centers, some schools have really strong centers in entrepreneurship or AI or whatever it is. Resources that the school has, whether it's going to be things like career placement and so forth. So that's on the academic side, the school, core school stuff. And then there's the personal, the connection with the schools, right? Your parent may have gone there. So in terms of legacy, you may have worked with an alum. I worked with this, my boss went to Columbia Business School, so I've always had a strong fascination in the school, whatever it is, right? Maybe you visited the campus, audited a class, did some additional, did some research with a professor from there or with the school itself, right? Attended a summer program, right? So just some things to kind of think about in terms of why our school and what really makes it unique for you, not just for me, but what that je ne sais quoi, that X factor that really makes that school line up with who you are, right? The way I would write this though is A, academics, C, community, L, location, then P, personal. That's how I would answer that question, which we talked about here, which is what aspects of our MBA program excite you the most and why, right? And you would put that in there. A great school that has always asked that question is like Stanford. The first question they usually ask is what matters most to you and why. And second of all, the second question is why Stanford in terms of pursuing your MBA. And somehow you kind of draw that linkage and you put it all together. The great essays stand out when they're unique to you. The ones that are trash are the ones that are going to just basically look through their website and just try to pretend or put some cookie cutter information about why Stanford stands out and has nothing really to do with you on a personal level. All right. Let's jump to the addendum. I try to structure the addendum. I'll give you another like mnemonic, ICE. First of all, you want to think about the introduction, then the context, and then the educational learning experience. That's the way I would structure it, 300-400 words on average. But again, it really depends. I think the question here, which was, please use this space to share any additional information about yourself that cannot be found elsewhere in your application. I think those essays typically are 250 words, but sometimes they go up to 300, 400 words. So just something to be mindful of. And almost every school will ask it. So let's kind of think about, when do you need an MBA, an addendum? Low GMAT, GRE, poor GPA, a gap in your career or lack of work experience that you want to explain, a medical issue like we talked about, why your recommender is not coming from your current supervisor. This is where you can kind of describe it. And then I kind of show you two quick examples. If you're talking about a low GMAT or GRE, for example, you're saying maybe you studied in a foreign education system and you performed badly in the SAT. And despite that, you study an international education system, so you don't have a very strong understanding of standardized testing, or you perform poorly in the SAT and the ACT and don't have a good understanding of the standardized testing system, like me, on both those fronts, right? And then possess a diagnosed learning disability. Let's say that you have a diagnosed learning disability, and even though they give you extra time, it's always been something that's difficult for you. Then I give you another example about a poor GPA, which, as you know, in business school is not critical to admission. So in this case, maybe you took on too many activities in school. Maybe you have poor time management skills in the beginning. Maybe you worked part-time or full-time while you're a student, and therefore it really affected you, or you did varsity sports and you just couldn't balance it all together. So just some kind of things to think about that could have affected your GPA. And that's where you can write it in terms of that structure I told you about. ICE, the introduction would be about, this is an addendum to explain my GPA or my GMAT or whatever it is. And, and I don't want you to think that score is indicative of my ability to perform in your school, period. And hence I'm providing this explanation for you. Remember, it's explanation, not excuses. Then context, you kind of talk about it. I studied here. I did this. Despite of this, I did that, whatever it is. And then if there is a learning experience or a takeaway message, you can put it in there. Despite not doing well in my SATs, I still exceedingly did well in undergraduate. Despite not doing well in my whatever, I historically have always performed well in environments that are not standardized testing, I even did very well, obviously, in the job. I got promoted 10 times. So given my job performance, given my undergraduate GPA, if it's good to offset a GMAT, I feel those are better indications of my ability to excel in your school. Okay, that's how I would structure that essay, which again, you don't want to neglect. You want to make sure that you include an addendum in your application, usually the optional statement, to explain any weakness. Don't just leave it to chance and then hope they'll figure it out. All right. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Pop it in the chat. We'll answer it in real time. All right. How do you get started? So you've got all these essays, maybe 2 essays, 3 essays, 4 essays. How do you start? First thing you want to do is ideate and outline. Start putting down all the ideas that pertain. First of all, I would do is put all your ideas down. And the way we do that is through a very detailed questionnaire. So we ask you all these questions and pull everything together into one cohesive document. Then we go through that document, right? And essentially start asking, ourselves, okay, given I just did this with a client. You talk about okay, we have a question on adversity, maybe another question on, diversity, and one on adversity, one on careers, one on professional contribution. And so you say, okay, you see how you talked about this? Let's put it in this essay. You see how you talked about that? Let's put this one in this essay, this one here, and you cover your bases. So the first thing you want to do is just write everything down. all your experiences, accomplishments, personal challenges, all that stuff, put it down, right? If you're not doing a questionnaire with us, then just put it down on a Google Doc. And then that's what we call the free writing process. Then start piecing it all into the different essays. Then start outlining it. Okay, so once you free write and then you place, then start outlining. So then you put in, let's say it's the addendum. So you go ICE. So your first paragraph header is issue, or in this case, introduction, excuse me. So you put introduction, then context, then educational learning experience. Underneath the introduction, you put in 1, 2, 3 bullets. Under the context, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullets. Under the educational learning experience, 1, 2, 3 bullets, right? And just bullet it out. No need for complete sentences. Then you take out those headers and you take those bullets and you kind of start forming them into paragraphs, refine them into paragraphs, right? And then finally, you just kind of fine tune and perfect it, make sure it's responsive, make sure it's within the word count, all that stuff. And then it's ready to go. That's how I would start it. You also can get second opinions, people who are mentors, admission specialists, strong writers, alumni of the program, whatever it is, so that they can also take a look at your application materials and say, yes, this is responsive, it's good, it's solid, it reflects who you are. I mean, obviously, this is what Right Track does. That's literally our bread and butter. So, that's what I would recommend. If you don't have an admissions consultant, go to someone who can just kind of help walk you through it. Now, I put something at the bottom there. Working with AI. So with that one, what I want to quickly tell you is you can, I think, use AI, ChatGPT, and so forth for the IDing and outlining. It's not impossible. I do a lot of that when I write emails, when I want to think through things. I kind of say, here's my ideas. Is there anything I'm missing? What else would you consider? And stuff like that. So that's kind of where you can use ChatGPT, and I think it's very useful. Where we don't recommend you using ChatGPT is in the drafting and editing process, taking something that you've written and say, edit it, or giving them something, a bunch of bullet points and say, draft this into an essay, because they can use software like GPT-0, which can immediately identify your essay as something that is problematic, and that you're using ChatGPT and AI or LLM mechanisms that then really can undermine the credibility of your application. Because I don't care what anyone tells me, there is no brains that is required to use ChatGPT. So there's nothing that's going to give you a level up. Unlike if you actually wrote your own application and it was outstanding because you spent time on it, then you should be rewarded for that. But not because you're good at writing prompts and then it produces the essay and then you literally copied and pasted it. That means really nothing. So that is important. Some schools are really cracking down hard. Last year, as I said, schools are cracking down hard on it. And I think more and more they're going to continue doing that, because I don't see any reason why a school would encourage the use of AI in writing your admissions essays. So just something to kind of think about there. All right, submitting your application. A couple of things I want you to think about in terms of pre-submission and post-submission. Proofread. Make sure it's absolutely flawless. There's no edit, no errors in there, which is why I told you get some people to review it with you so that you can make sure they're absolutely bulletproof and they don't have any kind of mistakes, grammar mistakes, syntax, and so forth. Submit earlier in terms of rounds. Aim no later than round 2 for your top choices. You don't want to be submitting for your top choice in round 3 or 4. You're probably never going to get in unless you have incredible diversity or an outlandish GMAT score, and it really sets you apart. Don't rush the submission though. If you can't make round 1 because you're still struggling to kind of perfect the essays, then don't just submit some slop in round 1, hoping for the best. Better to wait till round 2 and apply with an outstanding application. But remember, the enemy of good is better. So don't hold on to the application in perpetuity and then apply in round 3 in what you think is an outstanding Shakespearean application, because you're probably not going to get in and you've missed the boat. You've got to balance time with the application itself, okay? And then also, if you submit it well in advance, you can address any of those issues that may crop up. Oh, we didn't see your recommenders. Oh, your resume doesn't follow our formatting. Oh, you missed an essay. The formatting is off, whatever, right? So you want to make sure that you can address those as they come up. And obviously, if you have more lead time, the better. Post-submission, keep active. In case you're waitlisted, then you can say, hey, since I last applied, here's what I've done. right? And we'll talk a little bit about that in letter of continued interest. Prepare for the interviews, very important. Don't mess that up. The interviews are a very, very important part of the MBA application process, more than any other school out there almost. If you plan to retake the GMAT, the GRE between, like, let's say round 1 and round 2, and you applied in round 1, but you retook the GMAT because you want to give yourself the best chance of admission for round 2 because you have more time, then submit to the round 1 schools an update and say, hey, I took the GMAT, even if I know you can't, evaluate it because I've already submitted the score for during the round 1 deadline. I just wanted to let you know that I've improved since I last applied. I did that with the GRE. I had taken it again and then resubmitted my score when I was waitlisted at a graduate school. And it didn't help. I think I still got denied because, again, it's just a nice to have, but again, they're not required, right? They're not required to review it, right? They're not required to review it once you pass that round. But if they see it and you're on the fence, they could give it informal recognition, right? And then follow up. If you haven't heard back within a certain period of time, follow up with them. No news is good news. So, follow up. But, typically, if you're going to get an interview, it's going to happen fairly quickly after you submit. Another question from the eager Anna. Let's see what she said. If my GMAT scores have not arrived by the application due date, what should I do? And that's a great question. And yeah, I would recommend you follow up. You've got to time it, Anna, because if the GMAT score should come out fairly quickly, and it should actually come out immediately, as far as I remember. So you'll have the score, but it's not formalized. It's not credited by GMAT until I believe you get the writing sample done, or there's something to that effect, and they'll give you a formalized final weighted GMAT score, which I think comes out 2 or 3 weeks afterwards. So you've got to time it. You can't just take the GMAT the day before the deadline. You've got to know that the final date for taking the GMAT is 3 weeks before. If you don't get it and it's a clerical error on GMAT's part, then you can follow up with them and tell them. If you get it like the day after, you can beg them and say, please include this. It came out late. And they may or may not. They may just push you to the next round, right? So they just may push you from round 1 to round 2 or 2 to 3. So, but again, following up, being very gracious about it, definitely does help. So thanks for the question, Anna. Super important to kind of think about these things from that perspective and keep those things in mind. All right. Let's jump to the interview, my friends. The interview is a big, big deal. I told you that. And so these are important factors that I want you to kind of think about from the beginning. So let's think about it this way. The way you want to approach the business school interview is really the following. Preparation in terms of the preparation approach. Know yourself, know the school, know the interviewer. Know yourself, everything about your application, your background, your career, your goals, all of that, okay? Know the school, why that school. We talked about the why school essay. I really want to get really into the nuts and bolts about why that school makes the most sense for you. And then know your interviewer. If you can find out their background, great. But the idea of saying that is really have some questions prepared for the interviewer themselves. Okay. And when I think about all these 3 ways of kind of preparing for this process, I want you to think about this. Give me a second. Yeah. Think about those 3 things: before, during, and after. So preparing, be prepared. We talked about this. A little bit we alluded to, but here are some things you want to think about. Research and the interviewer style for the school. Is the school one where they sit with 3 people, 1 person? Do they do a video? Do they ask you a question? Some schools do this. They ask you a question. You have 1 minute to respond and record yourself doing it, right? So there's all kinds of ways. You want to make sure that you find out about the interview process for that school, okay? Then review all the application materials. Why you, why now, why us? So you want to make sure that you nailed all of that down, especially in terms of like that career goal idea of what you want to do, right? Then you want to research the school, think about researching on their website, researching social media, talking to current students, talking to alum about their experience, really kind of figuring out everything you can about that school. Obviously, visit it if you can, audit a class, so that when you're in the interview, you can talk about those things very naturally, okay? And then prepare the questions for the interviewer. Very different if your interviewer is an alum, which is typically the case, versus if your interviewer is like 2 alum and 1 staff, or the dean of admissions, or whatever it is, right? So you want to make sure that you hopefully know who your interview is and have a series of questions. If you don't know who your interview is, then have a series of questions for staff, alum, and let's say the dean of admissions. And the questions for students or for alum could be like, what regret do you have from the school, from that you wish you could have done differently when you attended? What was your favorite thing about it? What was your least favorite thing about it? How fast were you able to get a job? Did you get the good career support you did? Did you feel that the campus was diverse? How did it support diversity, right? Then if you're talking about to the staff members, again, maybe you talk to them about what's the school doing about diversity. I heard about this thing with the school. What are you guys doing to address it? What makes why are you working here? What makes you want to be at this school versus another school, right? So these are the kind of questions that you would ask them. And then I would also look at some hot button topics, because in the end of the day, especially if you get a question where the person's like, so what's your opinion about what's the recent economic trend or something? Those are going to be hard questions. I doubt they'll ask you, but it's just good to know or reference them, because then it shows you that you're kind of in the know and you're, familiar with current affairs, right? And then I kind of put this at the end after in terms of preparation, after you've done all of this and thought through this and asked the questions and gone through some past questions, MBA questions from the school, practice with family, practice with friends, practice with MBA alum, even students, practice in front of a mirror, practice in front of a camera, see how you sit, your disposition. Okay. So that's in terms of preparation. Presentable. Make sure that you're wearing something that's like, presentable to them. Comb your hair, shave, if you're a dude, or groom. If you're a woman, kind of put your hair, whatever it is that you want to think about. Like imagine you're just going into a real interview for a job. You're not going to walk in there looking all sloppy and disheveled. You want to, respect their time, respect their space. And so you want to come in there really, looking the part and respecting that the whole decorum, the presence of an interview. Be punctual, obviously. If you're coming to the interview, hopefully you get a chance to do it in person. Then you obviously don't want to kind of come in there a hot, sweaty mess, because you're late. You want to come in there having given yourself some time to sit down and kind of decompress before the interview and get, psych yourself up in a positive way. And if it's online, you want to make sure all your tools and everything's running and functioning absolutely perfectly so that you can just come in, your internet's on fire, the lighting is good, everything is, worthwhile, right? In terms of being professional during the interview, you don't want to use slang or drop F-bombs or S-bombs. I wish I can right now, but I'm keeping everything contained because you want to be professional. You want to, exhibit decorum. And you want to make sure that you respect the person. Like some people love it when you swear. I like it, but some people really find that offensive. So you want to, err on the side of caution, but be personable. So balance that professionalism with personalism. You want to be affable. You want to be somebody that's, that people gravitate towards, right? Someone that they enjoy talking to. So you want to have that personal connection, smile, make eye contact, laugh, don't look down, don't look to the sides, constantly like taking notes, because those are things that are going to be distracting. And then at the end, be polite, by submitting a letter, an email to them, thanking them for their time, maybe referencing, I really appreciate you gave me that point of advice. I'll definitely take it to heart, whatever it is, right? And then wish them a good week ahead, excuse me, a good weekend, and all that. All right. These are some things I really want you to think about in terms of the MBA interview process. Super important, very, very important part of the application, more so than a lot of other schools. And it makes sense. If I had it my way, every graduate program should have a strict interview process, because people, especially with ChatGPT, will probably not listen to me and write their essays with it. And they'll come out looking somewhat decent. And then when they get into the program, if that's the case and they got away with it, they're not suited for it. So I'd rather suss out everyone. And I was on the selection committee at Harvard for a specific fellowship that included MBA students. And that's how we were able to suss out folks, is we knew, okay, when we talked to them, like, whoa, that's so different from what we read, or other people pleasantly surprised us. Okay. All right. Let me know if you have any questions at all about the interview process. Okay. Let's continue to the final stage. You got denied is at the end of the road. You have a letter of appeal that you could submit. If, for example, you submitted the recommendation, but for some reason it never went to their system, even though you have proof that it went, right? A clerical error. That's pretty much the only way that you can get away with, really asking for that. There's also defer or waitlist. What should you do next? If you got deferred, and I don't know how often this happens, so don't ask me this question. I'm about to ask myself, and I don't have an answer for you, which is if you went through round one, can you get deferred to round two? I believe you can in rare circumstances. Typically, if you went to round one and you got rejected, you're rejected. If you didn't get invited. But in rare circumstances, I think you can go from round one and get deferred to round two, whereby you have a second bite at the apple. I know that they do that in other graduate programs and MBA programs. It's not as common, but it could happen, right? But if you get waitlisted, there's a letter of continued interest, as you guys see there, right? The Loki. And that's where the first part of it you really talk about, if you're given the opportunity to write a letter of continued interest. The first part is what have you been doing since you applied? And the second part is why that school really matters to you, which is why you really want to go visit the campus, talk to students, audit a class, do at least a virtual tour so that you have a better sense and can show them through demonstrated interest why you really care about them. If you got an offer, don't readily accept immediately. Balance it. Is this the right academic fit? Let's say you got to NYU, Columbia, Wharton, Kellogg, and Harvard. Take a look at all of them. See which one has the best academic fit, which one has the better reputation. How do you like the campus culture? Go visit those schools now that you got into them so that you can kind of go and check it out. Get a formal, tour of the campus. Figure out financial aid. If something like Kellogg gave you $10,000, you maybe be able to go to Columbia and say, hey, listen, Kellogg gave me $10,000. What can you do? Right? And so on and so forth. So you can negotiate the funding that you get. Also the location. You may not want to be in Chicago. You may want to be in New York, or you may not want to be in New York. You may want to be in Boston or California. So you want to think about the location. A lot of those factors of why you choosing the right school, which we talked about in webinar 1, but you want to make sure that you get it right. Because now you're really, now it's the next step is a big decision. It's no longer maybe if, no, now you got in. So you want to make sure you're making the best, most informed decision. All right. So those are the kind of things: denied, waitlisted, accepted, in terms of the process. And again, don't jump the gun. Make sure that you do your diligence so that you're picking the right school, because the last thing you want to do is finish the first year at an MBA program and transfer. And frankly, that happens very rarely. It doesn't happen as often as one does in terms of college, right? Where it's easy to transfer. All right, let's do a quick recap of the different aspects here. So what do we got? Brainstorm, map out. You want to do that early on in the summer. Standardized testing over the summer and early fall. Finalizing this list of schools over the summer and early fall, especially if you have the chance to visit the campuses and so forth. Maybe a good one is attending an MBA fair. I wrote it there because then you can get to talk to a lot of people who went to a lot of the programs that you may be interested in. Starting to prepare your application through the middle and late summer into the middle to late fall, the beginning to late middle fall. So that you can try to get everything done by round 1 or latest round 2. Okay. In that terms, like we talked about, the resume, the addendum, all your transcripts, those letters of recommendation, kind of lining it up and getting it all out of the way. Okay. Then there's the submissions process, obviously submitting between September and January, because I think round 2 ends around like the first week of January for some schools. Financial aid, obviously keep that in mind, whether you're going to go to your employer, whether you're going to get loans, whether you're going to save money, whether you're going to get private, scholarships or private loans and so forth. And then you've got the final decision between December for round 1 and May, which is typically round 2 and even round 3, so that you know which school you're going to be attending in the following fall. Okay, so that's just kind of a timeline strategy for you. I kind of added this here. We have a little bit of time so we can talk about this. It's what we call slash. And it's kind of slashing your way through business school to really give you the best experience possible. The number one thing I always say for business school, and I think everybody would say this, is be social. Social, social, social. Don't underestimate the importance of being social, of meeting people, being part of different circles. Look, if you don't drink, I'm not a big drinker, but still go out to those, those happy hours, those mixers, really be involved on campus, because I cannot tell you how many jobs you will get, how many investors you will get, how many, co-founders you can find all at MBA program, which you find typically through either classroom discussions or through social settings typically, okay? And we spoke about this in the first webinar in terms of I was telling you about housing and so forth. Then leadership. If you can take on a leadership activity at the school, like leading a student trek or leading a student organization, somewhere really flexing your leadership in front of leaders who are already type A students at the MBA program, that's great too, because people will say, oh, I remember this person. And for me personally, I can't tell you how many times when I did leadership as an undergraduate, I ended up being the editor-in-chief of a journal at the law school. After that, when I went back to grad school at Harvard, I became the president of an identity group. And now I'm the president or co-chair of an alumni council at the Center for Public Leadership. So all of this is really important because it just kind of keeps showing you leadership across the way, and students will vote for you. Students will have your back. People will have your back and hire you for their jobs when they see you in action on campus in that microcosm that is like the real world from that perspective. Academics, obviously you don't want to neglect your academics. And what I always tell people is take some classes that are going to cause you discomfort because nobody cares about your grades when you get into these top schools. So just take some classes in areas that, you're not really good at. Like I suck at finance. So I took finance at Harvard. I took courses on operations at Harvard, which I really didn't know much about at all, but I found that it's something I gravitated to. And now I use it as a selling point. I applied a lot of my learnings for managing Right Track and leading the company. And now I use it when I advise other companies in terms of operation strategy. Student treks, always a great idea because again, it comes back to that social element and the exposure you get from being around other people and other climates and other, things so that you can be like, oh, I went to Vietnam on my student trek and I met whoever out there, and that person, now I'm in touch with them. And when you come up with a business idea, maybe you are now working with that person on trying to use Vietnam as a beta market or whatever it is, or getting great labor from there, or using it as a partnership, whatever it is, right? So I think those student treks, if you can afford them, and if something that's, that you have the appetite for, highly, highly, highly encourage you to do that while you're at school. And finally, your health. Don't neglect it. Super, super important, guys. Physical health and mental health, which I don't feel like I have to talk to MBA students about because you guys get it. I can't tell you how many MBA students end up doing marathons or what have you as part of their application. But for me, health has always been paramount throughout all my education. I went 9 years of schooling over 4 schools and 15 years. And I always doubled down on my health in those environments, and it always transcended and continued, thank God, into my life in terms of exercising and so forth. So it's very, very important because it gives you clarity of mind, and and especially the mental health is so important because you don't want to get overwhelmed. If you're an introvert and you're in business school, it can get overwhelming, right? So you want to make sure that you're checking your mental health, giving a gut check to your physical health, so everything's coming together. So you're really maximizing that experience, slashing your way through business school. All right, guys. Let me quickly tell you who we are. We spoke about this last time. In terms of our approach to how we do the editing, in terms of comprehensive application support services, we've got a 4-part process: guiding, much like I'm doing right now, and we continue doing that to kind of get you through the process and so forth; story crafting, editing, and timekeeping, to kind of think through each one of these components and how important they are in terms of our overall process. In terms of our team, these are just some of our members, Wharton graduates, MIT graduates, and so forth. And in terms of that, we kind of focus on diversity, the diversity of our experts, their accomplishments, and their experience. Obviously, extremely important, not just experience in the admission cycle, but experience in terms of their own job and their own lives. And they don't kind of like some jobs are really fascinating in terms of what they've done, how they've done it, consulting, public service or public sector work, entrepreneurship, finance, you name it, right? So we like to kind of get our experts and staff them up with folks that have really eclectic experiences from that perspective. All right. These are the schools we've gotten people into. I've already addressed some of them: Wharton, Northwestern, some of the schools abroad, INSEAD, LBS, some of the big guns, Harvard, Stanford, Chicago. I remember last year we got a client, really, I was really happy with it, at the Sloan's Fellows program, 1-year program. So we don't just focus on the 2-year MBAs, but we focus on the executive education, or excuse me, the executive MBAs and part-time MBAs, as well as those, like one-year MBAs, like those fast-tracked MBAs as well. And finally, I kind of quickly want to kind of leave you guys with this. We spoke about this in part 1, which is that we have this crazy oracle that we've created to help you choose the right schools, which is obviously very much part of the battle in terms of the whole process itself. So I think that's something very, very important that you want to consider and think about. And if you have attended both of our workshops, please, email us, let us know, and we will provide you with the chance to qualify for that awesome oracle that we put together, and really spent a ton of time on it. All right. Any questions, any last minute questions on anything that we've discussed? No? All right. Well, thank you guys for joining me. Again, MBAs are one of my favorite people to help MBA applicants. It's something absolutely awesome. And we have a wonderful team to do the work with you guys. If you don't work with us, no problem, no harm, no foul. At least I hope I gave you guys some really good advice over the course of the last 2 webinars. If you have any questions, please email us right there, info@righttrackadmissions.com. And we look forward to helping you and getting you on the right track to success.